What? Are they crazy?
It's not a bug, it's a feature.
Hello and welcome to the Hackaday podcast. I'm Elliot Williams, editor-in-chief of Hackaday.
And I'm Tom Nardi, managing editor.
This is episode 162. This week, the Hackaday prize is on. Thermal printers are so hot these days, cloud chambers are super cool, and batteries must be replaceable. The big news this week is the kickoff of the 2022 Hackaday prize.
There you go. This is the biggest news, literally the biggest news that we can have in our little corner of the world. 5
different rounds of the Hackaday prize stretching from now until basically November. So This is the big news for us. A whole bunch of cool projects start popping out of the woodwork up on Hackaday.io, and it's always fun for us to see what you folks are working on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a highlight of my year, actually, is see them come through. I mean, it's a great cause. Some of the categories are really cool. Whatever we expect, the unexpected still comes through.
Actually, I should say Magenta Strongheart, who's leading the Hackaday Prize this year, decided on the theme of circular economies and trying to get our e-waste down and our productivity up. And then we brainstormed a bunch of the topics, and I was trying to think about how to make them both kind of maximally socially beneficial at the same time as maximally like hacker friendly. And so I think honestly we did a really pretty good balance. We'll have to see, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think the Hack It Back challenge specifically, I think is really cool. Where you're supposed to add new capabilities to older hardware, which is something we see a lot of, right, on the site as it is. So I think that's going to be somewhere where there's going to be a lot of fascinating entries, and it's a great way to keep older hardware in the game, right? Why throw it out and replace it when you can just put an ESP in there and add it to your smart home or whatever you're trying to do.
Man, every time I see some like IoT device where they just shut down the service.
Oh yeah, right.
And what are people supposed to do? Everybody's just supposed to throw away their working switches, their working IoT light bulbs. They're just supposed to pitch them all now. No. And so I love this one too for just that reason. Like there's all sorts of ways to go here. It's like, can you fix a device that has some bad dependencies? Can you get rid of those? Can you replicate a cloud service that'll keep a whole bunch of devices still running? Figure out a protocol that something uses to make it work with a modern computer and not its old dedicated compatriots or whatever.
Yeah.
There's just so many angles on that one. The recycling one, reuse, recycle, revamp, is basically anything facilitating recycling of material. And we've seen some awesome hacks. There was a really neat one a few months back now, I think. The project was aiming to determine what kind of plastics they are by doing kind of spectroscopy on them. And so you could tell, which recycling bin it has to go in. Have you ever seen a modern recycling plant? It's this insane kind of assembly line of different stages where they separate the plastic from the metal, and then they separate these plastics from that. And it's all of this awesome big machine design stuff. And I wonder if there's a smaller, household friendly version of these things. I don't know. I'm interested to see what people do here. Can crushers.
Yeah, hope you like can crushers. It's gonna be a bunch of them.
And of course, at the very end, there's the wildcard category. Can't do without the wildcard category. If your wildcard project fits into the overall general theme of reusing and making our activities as hackers lighter on the planet, that fits and that'll help out a lot. But it's good to have an anything goes category too, right? The Hackaday Prize, of course, is not a prize without the prize money. And again, we have to say thanks to our overlords at SupplyFrame and the generous sponsorship from DigiKey. We've got money to give away, and that is $50,000 for the first place, 20 for the second, 15 for third, 10 for fourth, 5,000 for fifth. But then one that's near and dear to my heart, 10 finalists from every round get a $500 prize. And so your chances of getting at least something are not zero here. It's really, there's some real money out there, but then there's also some good money for kind of the smaller but awesome projects. I was looking back through a bunch of years worth of Hackaday Prize because I had to give a talk on it. And I'll be damned, so many of those projects that got the like $500, the people who won them are still working on them a couple years later. And I just thought that was really awesome because, these are people who kind of are so invested in their project that, you give them $500, they plow that money back into their project and they just keep on working. And I think that is kind of, for me anyway, my view of the hacker world, that's kind of my optimal outcome, is that the people who win the prize money, the big one, the little one, they're like, this is awesome. This is going to help me push this project forward.
This is a journey into sound.
What's that sound?
What's that sound?
Oh, have you heard the What's That Sound this week? Hey, wait, did you hear that?
And I feel the fool. I mean, it's some kind of digital encoded something, but I don't immediately recognize what it's from.
All right, listeners out there, if you know what this sound is, fill in an entry over at hackaday.com/podcast. And out of all of the correct answers, one will be chosen at random to receive a Hackaday podcast t-shirt. Best of luck. My first hack this week comes from Tom Stanton's YouTube channel. This is a gravity water air-powered engine. And this is kind of fun because he's been working on these air-powered single-piston engines for quite a while now and trying to make them more efficient. This project ends up being kind of the ultimate test of how efficient he can make it, because instead of powering it with, a big compressor or even 2-liter water bottle pumped up with a bike pump, he's trying to do it with very low air pressure, and in particular, air pressure that he gets by closing off a vessel, attaching a hose to it, running the other side of that hose up to a bucket in his attic and filling it with water. And so the gimmick here is that the water pressure compresses the air that's in this cylinder, and then he uses that to run his little air engine and turn a propeller. It's surprisingly little pressure. He gets like half a bar, basically 0.6, I think, which is kind of 15 psi. Your bike tires are probably running 3 bar. Yeah. So they're probably, 6 times this much pressure in them. And he's trying to run his little air-driven engine on this thing. What's cool about this is 2 things for me. One, how he ends up kind of tweaking the engine to work with less pressure. Like it's got a hole in it that lets air in, that pushes a diaphragm, that pushes the piston down. And so he ends up having to enlarge that. But then too much air blows through. So then he's got another pin that he has to clip off so that it lets in shorter bursts of kind of more air to kind of tune the engine to the available power, which is kind of a neat way to think about that problem. And if you think about it, the power he has is limited because as soon as he starts drawing pressurized air out of this thing, water has to come pouring in from his attic down in to replace that space and, repressurize the air in the vessel. And so that's kind of what his maximum, that's kind of what limits the amount of power he can get out of the system. I thought that was kind of cool too.
The little air engine he was using, I think he said he tested it to like 0.7 bar previously. And he's like, okay, well, 0.6 is no big deal. But no, because
turned out to be
because it's not 0.6 continuous. As soon as you start using it, the pressure goes down. But just changing that diaphragm, I think he said he was able to run to down to 0.3 bar. Just by changing that one piece. So that was a pretty massive change there. And then I also liked how there were issues that, we kind of think of, in my mind, like a 3D printed compressed air engine. I'm worried about high pressure damaging something. I'd be worried about it blowing up, right? But in this case, there were kind of problems that came up because the pressure was too low, not too high, which is sort of kind of counterintuitive to me. Like there's the seal that he says that, at a higher pressure, it would be tight. But when he lowered the pressure, there wasn't enough pressure behind it to push the printed parts together. So that was kind of interesting that issues that weren't there at a higher pressure showed up at a lower pressure. Because he says basically, the layer lines in the print have a certain wonkiness to them. Yeah. So he warmed up the plastic there and then really smushed them together, kind of seated the I guess like a ball valve. You know, he like really seated the ball in there and kind of formed it to it. So then it worked at the lower pressure. But still, it is really amazing what you could do with with extruded plastic anymore.
Now, some people in the comments were like, he staged this. He didn't actually discover all that as he was going along. And I think, A, they're probably wrong. But B, that was the part of this video that I liked the most anyway. So even if he was doing it for entertainment value, it worked because he gets to go through all of these problems and kind of solve them iteratively. And I think it's actually legit, especially because he did something that's like super naive, which is he calculated how high his attic was and then said, okay, well, that's the head and that's going to be the pressure. And that's going to be the static pressure. But the second you start pulling air out of this thing, that water has to flow through the pipe. And he used this tiny, thin little pipe.
Like aquarium tube. Like.
And so there's going to be so much friction along this pipe resisting the water flow that he's just not going to get that same pressure out the bottom for kind of dynamic pressure. And I say this is naive because I used to do a lot of home brewing. And when you're setting up a kegerator, you have to calculate what you want the output pressure to be like at the tap head. And then you've got this line that runs back to the keg. And so you set the pressure you want at the output minus the loss in the hose that goes from the keg to the tap head. And if you go to a beer supply place, they sell you hose in calibrated PSI per foot drops. And so they tell you what the kind of like running resistance in the tube is. And this is something, I know very, very deeply in my heart that if you get these things wrong and your beer comes out all foamy, and if you put too little, you don't get any beer. Anyway, it was really, really fun to watch this.
You said he's been doing this for a while, but I mean, he's been doing this for a while with these air engines. I mean, I feel like it's been years probably, right? That he's been kind of improving this design.
I think it's a 2-year-long project.
Yeah, because he had like the airplane, and then there was the helicopter. I mean, this wasn't like he just decided today. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to spin a propeller with low air pressure. He's been doing this for quite some time. We've written about it. We could put that in the show notes too. But it's been really cool to see this evolve over time. So it's weird for somebody to say, like, "Oh, this isn't real," because I mean, talk about a long con. He's been working on this con for a long time, just to fool some stranger on the internet.
Something great came out of the comments, and that is that Kyle brought up the Trump and pointed me to a Grady/practical engineering video about it. I hadn't actually seen this one. It's essentially the same thing. It's a water pushing down on air and compressing it type machine. This is an early air compressor. They used to use these in mining back before, we had easily available compressors. And basically you entrain air in falling water. So like you have like a waterfall, you capture that, the bubbles go down underneath, and then you have a rise that goes up the other side to create the pressure for the air bubbles that come out of solution when they're in the bottom. And then those go up a third pipe under significant pressure because there's heavy water on either side of it pushing down, pushes the air up under pressure. And old-timey miners with access to waterfalls used to use these as a source of compressed air back in the day. Who knew? But it's exactly the same sort of thing that Tom's using in this project. So it's a kind of cool, historical version of the sort of thing that he's doing.
So this next one, I'll admit you might have heard about already. It kind of made the rounds. I think it was real big on Hacker News and those kind of circles. Developer by the name of Andrew got one of those little thermal printers and set it up so when he gets an issue on any of his GitHub repos, which apparently he's in charge of hundreds of them, it'll print out. And he said the inspiration was, seeing like a fast food order get, printed out in the kitchen. And it's such a cool little like blending of like the digital and the physical, right? I mean, it's a very simple idea. Issue comes in and a little piece of paper comes out, and of course, some people in the comments from me like, "Oh, this is a waste of paper. How can you do this? You should be more eco-conscious." But I mean, it's talk about you're not going to miss this, right? Like you're not going to miss this notification. This little printer is going, and the thing pops up in front of you, and you get to tear it off. And I like to imagine that he's like slapping it on one of them, like they do in the diner. They slap
when he's
it on
done
like
with
sharp,
it. Yeah,
when
slap
he's
it
done,
on the receipt needle.
Yeah. But no, it's really cool. I mean, and the GitHub API apparently makes this pretty easy. It's got to write some glue code, and it looks cool. It has a little new issue. Who put it in there? What it is? And kind of on a personal level, I thought this was really fascinating because I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I never get notified when somebody makes an issue on any of my repos and on GitHub. And I've looked in the settings, and they don't go to spam or nothing. I don't know. I mean, it must be something I'm doing. I'm pretty sure GitHub knows what they're doing. But I've had people would put an issue on one of my things, and I wouldn't notice it for a month, and I felt terrible. I'm very sorry. I don't know what's wrong with this thing. I don't get a notification. If I had them, printed out on paper, I could have solved that.
There's got to be a million ways you could riff on this too. You could have a dot matrix printer. I want to see someone do it with the fan fold paper with the green and white stripes on it. The tractor feed paper.
They were saying in the comments how the thermal paper is bad for you. It's got the chemicals or whatever in there, and so somebody said do a dot matrix on regular paper would be better.
If you have significant numbers of issues that it actually matters, maybe, I suppose. But
yeah,
I think you could start with your local grocery store first and then worry about code developers second, right? Just in terms of linear feet of receipt paper.
But we were talking about this, and immediately kind of came up we should have something similar for when a tip comes in on the tip line. That would make the gig a lot more exciting. Every time somebody sends something in, it just kind of cranks its way out. But so we'll all have these things, and we'll be wasting all kinds of thermal paper, so we can't. We'll have to take turns who gets to hold on to the printer.
How much do one of these little thermal printer things cost?
I think they're pretty cheap.
Who was it? Someone brought one to Hackaday SuperCon a bunch of years ago. I'm looking at the thermal printout receipt. Actually, I have it taped up to my door
because they
put a pie and a camera in there, and you took a picture, and it does a little picture of you on thermal printout paper. It's awesome.
And wasn't there one at 2019 where you hit the button and it spit out a puzzle or something
Yeah, that was the next year. They did one with a puzzle.
And then in the end, it was nothing, right? In the end, it was all a big fake out because the puzzle was unsolvable and it was just printing out garbage. Am I remembering that wrong? I think the whole thing was a troll.
Printing out garbage where you had to talk to other people and stuff like that. So the idea was to have hackers communicate with each other and work together and, hook people up together and stuff like that. But in the end, the cryptography was all bogus. That was good fun. Yeah, there's got to be all sorts of fun things you can do with receipt printers.
I'm pretty sure I'm buying one after we are done recording. I'll send you the link if you're looking for a good price. But there's all kinds of little notifications that'd be cool to run off on one. And I don't know, just something about, it's almost like one of those stock tickers, the noise, something important's happening. It's making that noise. On the other hand, I wonder how many troll issues they've made on this guy's repos since he's made it known that they're getting printed at his desk.
Once it blows up on Hacker News, half of the issues are just saying, hi.
I hope he unplugged the
first
printer
post.
When it was. Yeah, first.
All right, my next hack is actually a twofer of science lab hacks. First off, Tube Tumbler provides the perfect culture. This is the work of Sebastian S. Kochoba, aka AT Tiny Green Cell. This is his version of a culture swirler. I don't really know what these are called officially. It's basically it looks like a big Ferris wheel, but for culture tubes, and they're rotated at 30 degrees to the axis of rotation. So as they go over, it basically sloshes whatever's inside them gently from one side to the other.
Right.
And you vary the rotation speed of this thing, and it varies the sloshing speed in these little culture tubes. This is a particularly nice 3D print design. The little tube holders they fit into nice little pockets, and they have magnets that hold them in. They kind of snap in. It's got a nice name, Sir Tumblelot. You can't lose with that. It's got adjustable speed. It's driven by a stepper motor and an Arduino, so you can make it turn fast or slow. This is the kind of lab apparatus that if you had to buy it from the big lab companies would set you back hundreds of dollars.
I'm sure.
And if you 3D print it yourself, it's $50 and it's programmable. This is a super huge win for biolabs on a budget, and that's all biolabs.
Yeah, it's a great design. I my only regret is I don't know what I would do with it. And I think probably most people looking at it are going to say the same thing. This is really cool. I don't know what I could do with it because it's not like a centrifuge. I mean, if that's what you're thinking, it's not like that at all. I mean, first of all, it's horizontal, but it's not meant to pull something down to the bottom. You know, it kind of gives it this back, like you said, back and forth, like a sloshing, like a wave action kind of thing. And I guess that's important.
That's what you got to do with it. Dude,
like
it's for
like
science.
offhand, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure there's some science this is very critical for. Is that never nothing
if you
I've
don't
ever
need
done,
one,
but,
you maybe don't need one. No, here's what I would do with it.
Yeah. Here we go.
Uh-oh is right. If you filled each one of the vials with PCB etching solution and you had a whole ton of tiny PCBs you needed to agitate.
Very tiny ones.
This would very tiny.
Yeah.
This would agitate them for you.
That's pretty good. If I had like a little USB thumb drive sized PCBs, maybe I could pull that off.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're pretty chunky test tubes too. They're not like little tiny guys.
Yeah.
I was actually kind of surprised when I saw the video that they're pretty big tubes.
What else needs periodic sloshing?
They'll tell us. They'll let us know. Like,
you mix up. You could mix small amounts of paint.
Yeah,
you could
like bespoke colors.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe there's some kind of cocktails or something you can do in there, and just take a rough machine and drink it. It's a little bar bot.
Nice.
But no, it's a perfect example of like I need something. I'm going to build it. I'm not going to buy it, and we could be so lucky.
But there's another this week because a few days before we actually published PySpy, the camera setup designed to make biological observations better. This is a project by Greg Pask and al. At University of Maryland. The idea was to make a simple and flexible Raspberry Pi based camera, kind of intervalometry. It takes time-lapse photos, it turns lights on and off, it has image recognition and motion detection in it. It's all tied together with the GUI. The idea is to make kind of a general purpose tool that can help anyone doing, new word of the day for me, organismal biology. And that is study of kind of anything living of the macro scale, from kind of beans or bugs, or I guess even bacteria if they're plated out on like something. The idea is to make a system that's kind of standardized and has a nice GUI and is easy enough to set up that biologists who aren't necessarily programmers, coders, and hackers can just put this thing together and then use it for their work. And that means it's got like a nice stand, it's got a sweet ball and socket camera mount, it's got provisions for turning lights on and for having switches make interactions and things like that. It's really kind of a neat, all-purpose, time-lapse webcam measurement tool all in one. So it might actually be useful for you, even if you're not trying to like figure out ants' behavior or whatever. I actually grew up in a science lab. My dad was a biologist, not a organismal biologist, but a molecular biologist. And it was really cool because he did a lot of this sort of, him and his lab, they all did a lot of this sort of kind of informal hacking all the time. And it's only kind of in the modern era that we see scientists sharing this as kind of open hardware more formally with each other. And that's actually really useful. I mean, back in the day, it used to be he'd go to a conference with a bunch of other people doing this kind of protein biology, and they would compare notes and trade secrets and, all of that. But it wasn't kind of open and facilitated by the internet like it is now. If you're interested in seeing kind of what's going on in open hardware for science, there's links in the show notes to openhardware.science, which is kind of a clearinghouse for these kind of clever ideas.
Well, we probably could have planned this a little better because here's more talk of little thermal printers. But this article, retro portable computer packs printer for the trip. This is what some would call a cyberdeck. I mean, I guess there's a lot of room for interpretation there, right? But this is a foldable personal computer that looks straight out of an alternate reality version of the 1980s. It's called the Jupiter Personal Terminal. And its kind of defining feature is that it has an itty bitty screen and a giant printer right in the face, complete with a. I actually just noticed this now. There's one of the keycaps is a little thermal printer keycap, so you can just hit that one button and get a printout, whatever you're seeing on the microscopic screen. It's an awesome build. I mean, it's whimsical. I mean, obviously, I think it's meant to be kind of tongue in cheek, especially when you see the faux vintage advertisements that were created for it, which are really awesome. Also, if you took the printer out and you put a little bit bigger screen, I think this would be a super practical design, honestly, for a little portable custom machine. It's got mechanical keyboard. It's got a really cool hinge that sort of lets you fold it up like a lunchbox, I guess, for like a lack of a better word. And the internals are simple. It's a Pi Zero. Right now, it's the original one, but it sounds like whenever he could get one, he's going to put a Pi Zero 2 in there. A little display, and then just a cool detail I didn't mention in this write-up is that the power is just like a off-the-shelf, what is it, Anchor something power core, like USB battery pack.
Ah, sure.
And on the inside, there's male USB that is just kind of like anchored into the print. There's one of the pictures you can see there's like a little screw that's holding it down, like a set screw. That's just holding the male USB ends in there, and then there's a compartment where you just slide this whole power bank in. So it's like you just kind of slap this big power bank in the side, so you can actually, change the batteries. It's not immediately clear how you get it back out, actually, because it's just like once it's in there, it's kind of recessed. But I mean, it's not permanently
shake really hard,
right? Basically, it's not like permanently mounted in there, which I thought was really cool. You can actually eject this battery pack and put a new one in there, which is pretty. I don't think we've really seen that in many of these custom portables before. But yeah, just a really cool build. I think there's a lot of practicality there for the design. And I thought one of the cool details that I don't think we have an answer for yet, in the comments, somebody said, like, what is the brand and color of the filament? Because it looks exactly like an 80s computer that has faded into that, sickly kind of beige. So if you're trying to print parts to match, this is the filament you want.
This thing is so cute. And that's the other thing
yes, it is
everybody
cute.
is saying
perfect.
in the comments is that this is super cute. And it's got this, really nice 3D printed hinge that then kind of, like you said, folds it up like a lunchbox or like a purse or something, puts the keyboard against the screen and protects both of them and makes it, super handy. It's got that big battery in it and running, granted, a fairly gimped Pi Zero. It says it's a 75-hour battery, which, that's a fair bit of battery life if it's actually true. I mean,
well, with that tiny screen too, right?
Yeah, it's a really cute idea and makes me want one for sure. And it does also make me want to figure out, like you said, where he got the like random beige 3D printer filament.
Yeah. No,
So nice.
We've written about a lot of cyberdecks now, and I think a lot of times they are kind of more showy than practical, right? They're almost like cosplay props, and that's cool. Like if that's what you want, no judgment or anything. But I see this, and this is something I could see carrying around to, like I said, I would delete the printer and put like at least a 4-inch screen or something in there. But I could totally see this being a useful little terminal for playing around on, that you could easily take with you. The screen is protected. I mean, it's got all the earmarks of like a properly designed portable thing. It's not some thrown together idea. Like a lot of thought went into this clearly, and I could see myself carrying one of these around. Maybe not in that color, but and I also like. It's amazing how much that little indent he put around the screen kind of sells that CRT look too, which I really like.
Yeah.
I mean, it looks perfect for like like if it was just a square hole for the LCD,
Yep.
but whatever. But just something about that little bevel or whatever is like just a perfect touch.
That's the SC30 screen bevel. Yeah.
And in that color, I mean, if this was a prop or something from some cyberpunk 80s thing, I would totally buy it.
My last hack this week is Advanced Tinkering's Peltier Cloud Chamber produces some lovely trails, and this is a very nice cloud chamber build. If you don't know what a cloud chamber is, basically you take isopropyl alcohol and a super high voltage differential, you cool the isopropyl down so that it's almost condensing, And in this high voltage, when a radioactive particle goes zipping through, it condenses the alcohol, and you can see like clouds in the layer of otherwise kind of invisible, almost condensed isopropyl alcohol. The basic tricks here are how you get the light, how you get the voltage, and how you get the extreme cold that you need at the bottom. And this is like minus 35 C, which is probably about minus 35 Fahrenheit. It's damn cold. And that's what's interesting about this project. You can do it with dry ice. Advanced Tinkering does it with Peltier coolers. And in particular, he's got 4 double Peltier coolers. And the trick is that if you only use one Peltier cooler, you can get it down to kind of minus 10. But in a room that's at room temperature, you can't get it much colder than that. So there's a second Peltier cooler on the bottom that gets it even colder. And so they work together to kind of multiply it up. That means that you, have to put a lot of current into these things. And he says his runs at 60 amps at 12 volts. So this thing is not messing around. And then all that heat that it's pulling out of the system has to go somewhere. And so he's got twin water cooler blocks and then radiators with fans underneath the thing as well to get the waste heat away from the Peltier coolers. I always say that Peltier coolers are like one of the major sources of hacker tears because you think they're magical hot side, cold side devices. But the problem is if you want to cool something down, you have to throw all that heat somewhere. And the actual hard part of the problem isn't moving the heat across the Peltier cooler, it's getting rid of it on the other side. And he does a really great job of using kind of commodity water cooler type things to get the job done here. And so this is a sweet build, it's a clean build, it's a fire it up and it works build, and it's not hyper expensive, I think.
I'm glad you said commodity off-the-shelf hardware because it almost, like, to me, looking inside it says gaming PC to me, right? Like with the little radiators and the hoses and stuff. If I didn't see the dome on top, I'd be like, what is this? Like compact gaming unit or something. But yeah, it's gorgeous. I mean, this could be, if this was like a museum piece, I wouldn't doubt it at all. It's just the fit and finish is so well done on it, and not to mention the results, right?
Well, I'll admit I've wanted a cloud chamber, like a permanent one, forever and ever. And 3 years back now, Moritz von Sievers made an awesome one, very similar in design to this one, actually. We wrote it up. I'll throw the links in the show notes. And then later, Moritz came on as a contributor at Hackaday. So that's really fantastic. One of the best cloud chambers I've ever seen is the one from a YouTube channel called Cloudy Labs. And I don't know if he ever did a breakdown of how he built that one. Moritz shows you how he built his. This one we wrote up again back in 2019, building a bigger cloud chamber. I'll throw links for that in there. This kind of Peltier cooler, infinitely running cloud chamber thing is really cool. And it's the kind of thing you could just point a camera at for a long time and it would make an awesome movie. And that's what you can't do if you're doing it with dry ice, because eventually the dry ice all melts, right? And so that's why you want to do this with a Peltier cooler. If you're on the other side of technology, last year we had a trio of builds from Stoppi. This was one which was a Peltier cooler one which was a Charles Wilson style cloud chamber, where instead of cooling it down with a Peltier cooler, you cool the isopropanol gas down by pumping it up to really high pressure, letting it cool a little bit, and then you let the pressure go so that it expands out really suddenly and shock cools. And during the shock cooling, you can see the traces go through. It's not as cool as a continuous one, but it's easier than sourcing Peltier coolers. You just need a bike pump. And if that's too complicated for you, Stoppi also made one just in a PET water bottle that you squeeze really hard to make the same sort of compression and expansion thing go on. And that one I think is even driven on water vapor instead of alcohol, if I'm not mistaken. But you should watch the video on that. Again, the results are kind of proportional to the amount of work you put into these things, but the fact that you could do it with just like an LED flashlight and some water in a plastic bottle is pretty awesome. And then you can step up to your next levels. So if you're interested in cloud chambers and you don't have a good source of dry ice, go give that video a look.
Now this one, I'll have to admit, I actually misjudged at first. I was maybe a little dismissive. It taught me a valuable lesson, right? Don't judge a Hackaday
Shame on
article
you.
by the little picture. This one is you can turn soft drink bottles into handy solar lamps. And you look at the picture, and it's got a couple little soda bottles, and they're glowing. And I think probably a lot of us have seen, they'll put the bottles in the roof of like a little shack or something, and the sun hits the top of it, and it lights up the bottle. And oh wow, you got no electricity, it's lighting up the room. And that's what I thought this was. And actually, it is inspired by that project. But no, these are LED driven. So it's the same concept where you got a little bottle of like chlorinated water so it doesn't go nasty on you. But in this case, they've put a little LED light module on top, which is 3D printed and, totally like open design. You can put it together. And you could use them for garden lights. You could put them in, maybe an off-grid shed or something that doesn't have power. I mean, the reality is you're not going to beat the economics of scale, right? Like you could, if you want little LED garden lights, you could just get them for like $1. But I mean, there's something to be said for making them yourself and reusing the plastic bottles and having like this little self-designed DIY solar charger and everything. I mean, it's a cool project, and at least judging by the picture, like it's certainly produces a lot of light for a tiny little gadget.
Yeah, and they look really good. And like you say, I don't think you can beat the economies of scale here, but it's nice to see, this kind of extremely simple solar charging, and then when the sun goes down, drive the LED circuit. So, if you've ever wondered what goes on in these cheap solar garden lights, this is kind of the same circuit, right? So that's kind of cool to see. If you wanted to do something solar powered, this will maybe give you the inspiration you need. But then that 3D printed purpose-built case is awesome.
Very nice.
And, because the same thing screws into the top of the bottle as holds the solar cell up at exactly the right angle to capture maximum sunlight and stuff. And that makes me think that you could just take apart one of these cheap garden lights, use the economies of scale for you. Just, head out to IKEA, buy a 10-pack of these for a nickel or whatever the heck they cost.
Oh, yeah, they aren't crazy cheap anymore.
Take them apart, put them into this nice frame, and boom, you've got something that looks better, functions better, and was cheap.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Use what's already out there. Kind of shoehorn it into this case. I almost wonder too if you could find a garden light that had a close enough diameter, you could just kind of print some little adapter to just take the head of the garden light and put it right on a soda bottle.
Yeah, just print the bottle adapter. Yeah,
right.
touche.
Right. It is cool how the water makes such a small amount of light. Because he said, like the diffraction of water makes it a 360-degree light instead of...
Oh, you know what you could do? If you put something that fluoresced in there, you could make them funny colors. Like you could put like highlighter fluid, or actually vitamin B12 works really well for this. And then if you hit it with ultraviolet or like blue
like a UV
LEDs,
UV LED.
It'll like glow.
Wow.
Like that. So you could make these trippy too. If you could put different food coloring in there, it would be festive.
I think that was it Styro Pyro who was trying to make like the brightest flashlight, and it was highlighter water getting hit with blue lasers or something. And he said it was like highlighter water in tubes like behind a reflector or something, and then he was hitting them with blue lasers to fluoresce. Yeah, I saw it. This is like a little playground for lighting up fluids.
For sure. My first quick hack this week is from Ord. Lego String Winder hints at greater possibilities. I actually like this because I'd never seen one of those machines that winds string into like a ball of string super regularly. And this was a chance to see one. It happens to be built out of Lego. About half the people in the comments were like, this is actually useful. Next up, Stavros Korokitakis. AI-generated sleep podcast urges you to imagine pleasant nonsense. This is insane. He gives bedtime story prompts to APT-3. It makes a basically nonsensical but plausible sounding text. He feeds this into a speech synthesis, adds in a backing track of kind of spacey ambient mood music, and uses this as bedtime stories. He's just throwing all these different things together, but it makes a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. And last up, Cut Sauce AT-Tiny 85 Snake Game is a circuit sandwich. I mean, first of all, who doesn't like hand-built snake games? Nobody. We all love them. But this one is fabricated in a particularly interesting way. It's got two thin pieces of plywood with holes drilled in them that the legs of all of the through-hole parts go through. They're actually soldered straight on the back of this, both on the top and the bottom. And to keep all the parts from touching each other, he makes a kind of a cork gasket that goes around them. And so you have this wood sandwich that then holds the whole device and serves as kind of its like Erzad's PCB substrate or something. It's a sweet build technique, and it's one that after 18 years of Hackaday, I'd still never seen before.
Well, my first quick hack is from Lone Soul Surfer. This one is cute oscilloscope, uses LEDs for display, and that's a very apt description. If you can imagine like a Fisher-Price, my first oscilloscope, that's a lot like what this looks like. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's a real cool design. The defining feature is that instead of an LCD or anything like that, it has a 10 by 10 matrix of LEDs to show the signal. Now, you might wonder what kind of resolution you get with that, and it's not great, but it's enough to see if it's going up or down, at least. And with an onboard microphone, it can do music visualizations and that sort of thing. I mean, it's enough to show you the concept, right? One of the real cool details on this is that Lone Soul Surfer was actually able to source 5mm square LEDs. So even with all the LED matrix products we've seen over the years, this does have a very unique look to it. Next up is finally the venerable Vectrex gets a mini makeover. This one comes from Brendan, and we've seen mini PlayStations and NESs and Super Nintendos and Genesis, all the classic systems, but we haven't seen a tiny little Vectrex. And now we have one. It's 3D printed. It looks the part. It's even got a little scale controller with it. The big question, of course, is does it have a vector display? And unfortunately, it does not. But beyond that, it looks the part, and you can play all the games with the built-in Raspberry Pi running RetroPie. And my last quick hack comes from Action Box. This one is 3D printed forged for recycling. Now, I got to be honest about this video. There's some questionable moments, and I think that some very valuable lessons were learned while making the video. There's a lot of classic mistakes working with molten metal, like pouring it into a wet mold and having it splatter everywhere. So take what you see with a grain of salt. But in the end, it does really show just how easy it is, to make your own kind of home forge and melt down scraps into little blocks that you could, machine later. I mean, it was really wild to see how quickly they could turn, a piece of aluminum extrusion into a little crucible of molten rage. So, like I said, watch with a grain of salt, but, you can't help but be inspired.
That brings us to our can't miss articles. These are long-form original content pieces written by our own fantastic Hackaday writing staff. I'll start off this week with Christina Panos's Is the iPhone camera too smart or not smart enough? This is a really interesting write-up of some of the advances that have been incrementally creeping into cameras, and not just the iPhone, but actually the Google Pixels are like this too. They have a bunch of different cameras on them, and they kind of interpret what's going on with all of them together and synthesize it into a picture. Some of the cool things that the iPhone camera is doing in particular, some really cool AI smoothing on the pictures with the intention of removing grain from the images. And so it makes them look better. But, it doesn't always necessarily do it the way you'd want. And because it's AI, of course, sometimes it dreams things that don't exist. And that's a little bit creepy. I think serious photographers have been playing around with these and will, for instance, put it on the camera that's supposed to be the telephoto. Maybe you're taking a picture far away, but if it's too dark for that camera to function, it automatically switches over to the wide-angle lens, which works in lower light, and then crops it down for you to the telephoto angle you were requesting and stuff like this. And so it's doing all of these kind of tricks in the background. Oh yeah, it's doing a lot of high dynamic range things as well. It's combining, it's taking multiple pictures with all of these different cameras and kind of averaging the exposures together to get a high dynamic range image out. And I think the question here is, for serious photographers, it's taking too much control away from them and it makes them wish they could do something else with it. But for kind of naive photographers, maybe it's actually helping them get a picture where they wouldn't have before. But at the same time, if you're trying to take a picture of a sunset and you know that it's supposed to be kind of sunset levels of illumination and the camera doesn't know it's a sunset and changes it so that it looks like broad daylight, it's kind of screwing up your picture at the same time too.
That's kind of the interesting thrust of the whole thing, right? Like, are we letting the cameras dictate a reality to us? When we look back years later, like, was it broad daylight when I took this picture? I don't remember. I mean, I've had similar stuff happen. I have a Pixel phone too, and I don't think I guess I've ever had one inadvertently, but there was definitely pictures where I was playing around with some of the settings, and I looked at them later. I'm like, that just looks really weird. Like, something strange with this, right? But then on the other hand, I can't deny that the new, I don't know what it is. If it's the software, if it's the hardware, but I mean, the phones are taking incredible pictures. And they make it super, super easy. It's hard to... Certainly, there might be a downside to it, but I think probably in day-to-day usage, right? Like, it is a benefit. I know, like, when I would do the teardowns, I'd use Nikon DSLR, and I got, external lights, and I use like a little white balance target and stuff, and I got to do all this to make the thing look like it's supposed to look, right? But then, like, I could take a picture with the Pixel phone, and it pretty much does it right off. Like, it's all that is done for me. You don't have to worry about that, and it's amazing. Even in lower lights, it'll take a picture that you would never think it was a low light. And it's not as flexible. Like, I can't put like the macro lens on there and stuff. Obviously, there's still things you want a real camera for and all that control. But I could certainly see how for 99% of the population, I mean, it is like the epitome of a point and shoot and be happy with what you got, even if a lot of magic went on behind the scenes to get you there.
There's a little anecdote about you in this story too, though, isn't there?
And that's kind of, I think we talked about before, like we do kind of brainstorm these stories sometimes in a little video call. I think she was leading with like, the picture where it's the sunset and all that and how it could change it. And I was like, oh yeah, that's, now that you mentioned it, my daughter's preschool sent us a picture of her. And I think it was, I don't know, they're having some little event in the class. And she sent a picture and I was taken aback. I was like, who is this little model baby with these plump lips and these rosy cheeks? And, it looked like she had been
and
done
lipstick.
Up, like, yeah, right. Like, it looked like she was going to go on like one of these little kid beauty pageants. And I kind of freaked out. Like, what is going on? And then you look and it's got like the little fake LCD timestamp and stuff. And then I realized, like, no, it's just some filter that they left on. There's like a little app that you can send the teachers a message. And we're like, is there a filter on there? And they're like, oh, sorry. Like, we didn't mean to filter all the toddlers. But, it's a perfect example of how whoever took the picture probably had a filter for taking a selfie or something and left it on and then taking pictures of these kids. And now the kids are looking all beautified. It's just a little surreal. I mean, I'm, even looking at the picture now while I'm talking about it. Like, I know that's my kid, but it looks like a CG rendering of my kid. And it was funny too. Like, I told my wife that this picture was going to go on there. And she's like, well, should you include like the untouched one? And I was like, I think they'll get it. Like, I think they'll get that this is not how the toddler looks. You're not going to need like an A/B comparison for this one. It's pretty clear that something has been done. Like, I don't think the effect is, particularly designed for 3-year-old faces. So it's got this weird uncanny valley thing about it.
Just 3-year-olds with Botox. You have to start worrying, right? Like, I think that's part of the point, though, is that we've gotten to this point where you can have these filters that do kind of crazy fun and obviously artistic / artificial things with the pictures. And you can turn these filters on or off. But then there's also another layer under that where the camera is just doing that by default all the time. And you may or may not be able to turn that on or off. And
that's true.
Christina actually links to a page written by the people who make a photography app for the iPhones that kind of sidesteps some of the processing they do. But even they can't sidestep all of it. And I think that is the point that maybe irks some serious photographers about these cameras, is that you want to be able to shoot in RAW and have it just give you what the image sensor sees. And that, with the iPhones anyway, isn't a thing anymore. They'll give you a raw photograph, but it's still post this first kind of round of synthesis they do with putting the three images together, but it doesn't have the second level of AI post-processing on top of it. One possible way to look at this is we're kind of slipping into this world where the choice to have the pictures actually represent reality is a little bit taken away from us already. On the other hand, like you say, they do such a good job with, kind of getting the basics right, like getting the exposure right and getting the focus right. That's the sort of thing that like 99% of the time, normal non-photographers, people who are just taking photos with their phone because they want a picture of something, are worried about anyways, just getting it to look halfway representable. And I think, I don't know, the serious like artsy photographers who want more control won't be shooting it with their cell phone cameras anyway. They'll get, pardon me for saying this, a real camera and do their photos with that.
Well, I think that's perfect. That's the takeaway. Like, the real camera is not going away anytime soon. I mean, it's maybe for the average, family vacation, you don't need to have the big camera around your neck anymore, but there will always be a need for, actually having manual control and all the dials and knobs that confuse, but the average person, the pro guys, they need that, and they're going to need that for, I would say, forever, right?
If you are making conscious choices about the way you expose things or what you put in the frame, and you're trying to express something by this, that's not a control you want to give up to, some AI in your cell phone, right? Like, so if you're a serious photographer, you want to do this stuff yourself, and you just want the camera to let you make the choices as quickly and obviously and transparently and easily as they possibly can. And this isn't doing that. This is like doing it all for you. And that's cool too. Like, it's a different application. I mean, I'm on the like serious photography side of the spectrum. There will never be, because of physics, a substitute for having a lot of glass in a lens. Like, you're always going to get better pictures and better resolution out of a bigger chunk of glass. And these little camera lenses aren't ever going to do it, no matter how much software they throw at the problem. There's always going to be, compromises made there. But the other side of that coin, for me as kind of serious photographer guy, looking at the photos that cell phones are putting out these days, the amount of stuff they're able to do in software is nothing short of amazing. And if you look at some of the particularly the grain reduction things that the newer phones are doing, you could take these super low light pictures and it just smooths it all out for you. Mm-hmm. And occasionally it gets things wrong and it looks like a painting rather than a photograph, but it's a damn smooth looking painting. I think in the future we will be making these weird aesthetic choices that are like, which AI did you use to take this photograph?
Oh yeah.
And which I set the crazy smoothing, I set the deep dream up to 9. What did you do when you took this photo? Like, there's going to be a way to turn this into a range of artistic expression as well. I'm sure of it.
The easy way to piss off a photographer is be like, "Oh, your camera takes such great pictures." Well, my pick this week, I think, is something that's going to be near and dear to pretty much all of our hearts. This one's from Lewin Day. Replaceable batteries are coming back to phones if the EU gets its way. New legislation coming into effect is 2024 that says everything from your electric toothbrush to your phone to even scooters and light vehicles must have replaceable batteries. the end of the permanent sealed battery may be on the horizon. Granted, only for the EU, but there's a hope that if they do, rather than make two totally different versions, that hopefully some of these features would show up in like the global version, or maybe they'll just make one. They'll say, "Oh, screw it, we'll make one where you can take the battery out." I mean, obviously the biggest thing for us right now, right, is phones. I would be willing to. I don't want to paint myself into a corner. Somebody will email and be like, "Well, I still have my briefcase phone from the '80s," but I was gonna say I'd be willing to bet most people listening to this have a phone where you can't take the battery out anymore. I mean, it's becoming. I fought the good fight for years. I would always try to get the phone where I could get the battery out. And you could do it for a while, but there's just fewer and fewer and fewer phones still offer that as a feature that eventually you just you can't hold out, right? Like the headphone jack. I'm still managing to find phones with a headphone jack. But yeah, the replaceable battery is increasingly like the dodo bird. It just goes away, and we're meant to charge these things for the 500 cycles or whatever the cells are good for, and then I'm supposed to throw it away. Like I'm supposed to throw the phone away, like because the battery's bad, and it's ridiculous if you think about it. The other side of the argument, and I was a little surprised because some people did say this in the comments. It was a minority, but some people were like, "Well, I want that. I want that super slim, waterproof, hermetically sealed phone. I don't want a big stupid phone with a slide off thing or." And I get it. I get there's a reason, right? The phone manufacturers moved to having these sealed batteries because it does make a smaller device. It does make a slimmer, sexier looking thing, but at what cost?
For
right?
the cost.
Yeah. I mean,
they could do it if they wanted to, and I'll debate this one that it's necessary for sealing. I mean, it's definitely easier to make a phone that's waterproof if it's glued shut, and that I totally appreciate. But you could also do it with a rubber seal and some of those like hyper tiny screws.
Yeah, but I mean, the introduction of fasteners, right, is going to make it. Well, it would cost more, and I don't think you could do it at the same razor thin dimensions as some of these phones are. It's going to add bulk. I mean, there's no way not to add.
Have you ever taken apart a cell phone? The screws they have in those things are tiny. You totally could. I claim. As a non-cell phone manufacturer, I totally claim.
I would counter that the last phone I had that was held on with screws was a hell of a lot chunkier than the phone I have now. And I guess you could say that those are not causality and all that, but I feel like there's no way to make them as thin. I mean, but that's neither here nor there, right? Like, we need to have replaceable batteries, even if there is an aesthetic cost to it. Like, it is crazy that we're supposed to throw these things away because the battery died in them, or the battery poofed up and blew the screen out because there was there's no battery door to pop out. So I think this is certainly a win for consumers. I mean, that kind of plays into right to repair. I'm sure some people will be unhappy, namely the people who have to make these phones, and they want to sell you a new one every time the internal battery died. It is going to be interesting to see some of the other, because they're saying everything across the board. So you're going to see a lot of design changes in a lot of devices you were thought like a solved problem. Electric toothbrushes and stuff like that. They're all going to have like some kind of little hatch or some kind of opening. So there's a lot of designs. There's going to be a lot of long nights at a lot of these places where they're like, "What do you mean we got to redesign the toothbrush, or we got to redesign our little digital thermometer?" But I think it's worth it in the end. I'm all for it. And then even end of life too, like when these things are getting recycled. Even if for one end, like you want to replace your own battery, right? Because you want to use your device for as long as possible. You don't want to throw away a working phone because the battery's shot. But then at the end, eventually, when it does get trashed, we need to be able to take these batteries out so that we're not sending these batteries to to landfills and that kind of thing. So I think it's a win
all around,
no matter what way you slice it. Yeah, I mean, it's well, it seems like common sense, right? I hope it changes the game. I hope we see it worldwide. I hope it isn't just limited to the EU, but we'll have to see how it plays out.
What's funny is this actually is coming in through the battery recycling angle. And I think it's fun that you guys all caught up on the, like, this is going to make our devices repairable angle. But this is actually aimed at making lithium-ion batteries more recyclable. Lithium-ion batteries should be totally recyclable. The problem is that it's glued inside this busted, no longer used cell phone, right? So you can't get it out. At least the way the law is written, it's a battery recycling law. It's that you have to be able to get the battery out of the device in order to recycle the battery at the device's end of life. But it does also have this like knock-on benefit that having replaceable batteries means you can keep your thing running longer. And so they both go hand in hand. Dan Maloney actually wrote a piece on how lead acid batteries, the ones in your car, are like 90-something% recyclable because there's this mandated put a deposit on a car battery system, return it, it gets recycled. 98% is the number. And 98% of the value out of the battery gets recycled. And why aren't we doing this with lithium-ion batteries? And the answer is just because there's no incentive for the consumer to do it, and because the makers of these devices aren't making them so you can pull the battery out and take it to the recycling center. And I think that's part of what they're also looking to change here. They're talking about putting a deposit on lithium-ion batteries that you can then get back when you take it to, whatever store you bought the thing at. And so they're actually talking about making the lithium-ion battery recycling market work like the car battery recycling market, which has been phenomenally successful. And if that happens, then, of course, all these worries, everybody's wringing their hands about lithium shortages because we need so many new batteries. If we can get the lithium recycling levels up to like where the lead battery recycling levels are, this kind of solves that problem. And so that's awesome too. And so this is like a double win for everything. And there is maybe the size penalty, although I'm that guy. I have only cell phones with rechargeable batteries. And that means that the one, my daily driver is a Samsung S3, which must be 10 years old now, 12 years old. Like the thing is freaking ancient. But so how do I run a phone that's this old? The answer is when I need a new battery, I just open the back, buy a new one on eBay, slap it in there. $7 later, I'm back up to full power, right? Like it's no problem to replace the battery on this thing. A couple of my other phones are like that too. I actually have a Nexus 5 that I use for screwing around. That's an awesome phone, replaceable battery. And if you look at these in comparison to any modern phone, they are not actually thicker. That's a lie. What they aren't is waterproof. They're not waterproof to the same level as those other phones, but that's a separate problem. And I think that some of the this is going to make phones thicker thing is marketing by the industry. Samsung has put out a couple of press releases saying how this is going to destroy their phones and how consumers want this and consumers want that. But I think at the end of the day, Samsung also wants to be able to use those tape strips, which cost them nothing in terms of assembly cost relative to having a robot that has to screw all these little tiny screws in. And I think Samsung is talking out the cost-benefit analysis side of their corporate whole.
I mean, I guess the flip side argument would be that, the batteries was also smaller and you probably didn't have like a QI coil or anything in the back. But all right, I'll grant you that. They were, it wasn't like these were big bricks we were carrying around that long ago. Anyway, incidentally, for the record, if anybody is listening, 2012, the S3 came out. So I my hat's off to you for still running that one. Is that the last one you could change the battery?
No, absolutely not. You could change the battery for like 4 years after that, 5 years after that. But this is the last one that has a separate Wi-Fi and phone modem in it. If you're interested in total tinfoil hat security stuff, this one is actually significantly securer because you can actually run a full open source operating system on it from top to bottom that has like a hands-off transaction with the phone and Wi-Fi modems. Whereas all the other phones, even if you're running open source on it, you've got proprietary blobs from Broadcom that do the modem stuff.
Well, there goes the resale value on these phones. I should get one before the podcast goes out. They're snapping up all the cheap ones.
Plus they cost like $15 used on eBay. You can, dude, and you get a new battery for another $7-10 and boom, you've got a new phone with a horribly slow processor, not enough memory, and a low-resolution screen and a mediocre camera. But as a phone, it's a pretty phony phone.
But that kind of brings up an interesting point, too, because, all right, so you got a 9-year-old phone. The batteries are, by their nature, 9 years old, too, right? And probably sitting on a shelf somewhere. So, I mean, that kind of speaks to the idea that we should also be using standardized batteries, which I think is also kind of part of this, where you don't necessarily have to, you know what I mean? You don't have to get the S3 battery. You'd be able to get one, unified
right?
Samsung battery at least. Because I know that's the problem with, you can open it now.
I'm going to pop it open and see what the date code on the battery is.
Yeah, that would be the next evolution of this. Okay, so fine, I can open it, but if I'm still beholden to some ancient battery that has been sitting on a shelf for a decade and probably easily replaceable, and I think it said in there with common tools too. The language is very nice. It's not, they try to close all the loopholes right before they can exploit them. You have to use common tools.
It's worth noting that the European Union has shaken up the cell phone world before. The whole all cell phones charge on micro USB thing was also a European Union directive, and that one spread out through the whole world. So there is kind of hope that this one will do the same, and I think that's actually probably for the best of everybody. We'll see. All right, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write us an email, editor@hackaday.com. If you see any good tips, let us know, tips@hackaday.com. And as usual, the show notes can all be found at hackaday.com/podcast. And until next week,
keep on hacking.
A 1, a 2, a 1, 2, 3.
These are the guys running it. Yeah, I'm not putting nothing in there.
You what?
I think that's from Lord of the Rings, actually. It was one of the elves.
I can't say I haven't had a still explode in the upstairs bathroom of my house. So,
This is going to be like a horror film.
A little playground for lighting up fluids. How many times have I said that?